Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Middle Ground Book Fest. My name is Christina Ammirati, and I'm an educator of 17 years, an avid reader and bookstagrammer at Band of MG Books, and the middle child with an older brother and a younger sister. I'm thrilled to moderate this discussion about sibling relationships. Thank you all for tuning in. I'm so honored to introduce these 6 incredible authors joining us on this panel today. I ask that after each of you share a bit about your book, please tell us if you have any siblings. Described as a delectable treat, Rajani LaRocca's debut is an Indies Introduced selection, a Kids Indie Next Picked, a Kirkus Star Review, and a Best Middle Grade Book of 2019, and amongst many other awards. Rajani, please tell us about your scrumptious book, Midsummer's Mayhem.
Hi, so I'm Rajani LaRocca. This is Midsummer's Mayhem. It is a book that is an Indian American mashup of A Midsummer Night's Dream and Cupcake Wars. And it's about an 11-year-old girl named Mimi who really loves to bake, but has 3 older siblings who are talented at all kinds of things. And so Mimi feels a little bit invisible and lost in her own family because she thinks she'll never measure up to them. Then she finds out about a local bakery that is holding a kids baking contest. And she thinks if she can just win that contest, she can finally prove she's not the least talented member of her family. Her dad, who is a food writer, comes back from a business trip and he can't tell the difference between delicious food and disgusting food. And Mimi doesn't know what's up with that. And without his help, she has no idea how she's going to win the contest. She follows some mysteriously familiar music into the woods behind her house, where she meets a boy named Vic, who also loves to bake. And together they find all kinds of ingredients in the woods and bake with them. And then everyone around her starts acting really strange. So Mimi's got to figure out what's wrong with everyone. Can she win the contest? And can she fix everyone, including the members of her family? So Mimi has 3 older siblings. Here's the secret. I have no siblings. Wow. I'm an only child.
Wow. Excellent. Great. We'll come back to that for sure. Thank you. Our next author's book is described as a revelation and a gift. Her middle grade debut is a Junior Library Guild selection, has earned 5-star reviews from Publishers Weekly, Book Page, School Library Journal, Shelf Awareness, and Book List. Mariama J Lockington, please tell us about your powerful book for Black girls like me.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Mariama. This is For Black Girls Like Me. And For Black Girls Like Me is the story of an 11-year-old girl named Makeda. And she is the only Black person in her family because when she was a baby, she was adopted. So she is the youngest sibling. She has a mom and a dad and an older sister named Eve. And the story really begins when in the middle of her 6th grade year, her dad, who is a musician, her parents are both musicians, gets a job across the country in a new state, Albuquerque, New Mexico. And so Makeda has to leave Baltimore, Maryland, which is the only home she's ever known. She has to leave her best friend, who's also a Black girl adopted by white parents, and she travels all the way across the country for this new life. And things in New Mexico, landscape-wise, look different. And then also, she's just trying to figure out where she belongs. And so she's dealing with trying to find new friends at a school in the middle of the year. And she's also dealing with some growing pains between her and her sister. She's 11 and her sister is 14, and so they don't have the same interests anymore. And she's also trying to figure out all these dreams she's having about her biological family and her biological mother. So when her summer goes from kind of bad to worse because some things that her family is going through, specifically her mother, Makeda turns to music and dreaming to sort of anchor herself in the world. And it is a book that's based on some of my own experiences growing up. It is fiction, but I also am a Black adoptee. But I am actually the oldest of 4. So I'm not the youngest child. I'm the oldest of 4 siblings.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you. Our next book was described as a page-turning, exhilarating tale. Katie Zhao's fantasy adventure debut earned a star review from Book List, who called her story impressive and captivating. Katie, please tell us about your enthralling book, The Dragon Warrior.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. This is my debut novel, The Dragon Warrior. Just a quick plug, the sequel is called The Fallen Hero, and it comes out this October, so look out for that. But yeah, the Dragon Warrior is the story of a 12-year-old Chinese multiracial warrior girl named Farron Liu and her younger brother Alex. And they're sort of seen as outsiders in this secret warrior society called the Jade Society in San Francisco's Chinatown. So they've grown up in this like really secretive warrior society where the warriors will train to defeat demons and protect San Francisco's Chinatown. But you know, in recent years, they haven't seen much activities, so they've sort of grown kind of complacent. And Farron and her brother are sort of ostracized for looking different than the other warriors and for having a different heritage. And so they have to train in secret. And then one day, everything changes during the Lunar New Year when a demon attacks San Francisco's Chinatown. And it turns out that Farron is the only one who's there and able to save the entire Chinatown from this demon. And then that event sparks sort of a reconciliation between the gods and warriors. So the Chinese gods come back down to the earth and they ask the warriors to choose the bravest warriors to go on a quest. And it ends up being Farron and Alex and a few of their friends who go on this quest together, and they travel through Chinatowns and they end up fighting a lot of gods and demons and making a lot of friends, but also a lot of enemies along the way. And it's basically the story of my heart, the story of my childhood, growing up Chinese American and loving to travel through Chinatowns when I was younger. This is the fantasy version of that. And I also grew up with two younger sisters. So I'm the oldest sister and Farron is the oldest sister. So there's definitely a lot of influence and personal background intertwined into the story.
Oh, excellent. Great. Our next author's debut was described as tender and illuminating. Nicole Panteleakos' debut earned 3-star reviews from Kirkus, Booklist, School Library Journal, and is the recipient of a Nerdy Book Club Award, and amongst many others. Nicole, please tell us about your stellar book, Planet Earth is Blue.
Hi, thanks. So Planet Earth is Blue is the story of Nova, who is a nonverbal autistic 12-year-old girl who's counting down the days until Challenger launches the first teacher into space because her missing older sister Bridget promised to come back so they could watch it together. So it takes place in the 1980s, mostly in 1986, but with flashbacks to when she was younger. And Nova and her sister Bridget are not only very close, but Bridget is really the only person who understands Nova. They've both spent most of their lives in foster care. And as I said, Nova is nonverbal, so she gets moved from family to family and it's difficult to communicate, and Bridget's always been there to help her. And now for the first time, Bridget is not, and Nova doesn't understand where she is or why she's not coming back.
Wow, powerful. Thank you.
Oh, and I forgot, I'm so sorry. And I am also an older sister. I have a younger brother, and then I have 3 stepbrothers. So
Okay.
sisters.
One. Excellent. So it's a nice large family. Our next author has 2 books and published currently and described as riveting and intriguing. Melanie Sumrow's debut, The Prophet Calls, is a 2019 Writers League of Texas Award finalist and earned a star review from Shelf Awareness, as just her second novel did, The Inside Battle. So Melanie, please tell us about your eye-opening books.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. My name is Melanie Sumrow, and I write for those readers who kind of fall in the gaps between middle grade and YA. So both of my protagonists are 13 years old, and my latest book is The Inside Battle. It's the story of Rebel Mercer, who wants nothing more than his father's approval. But when he follows his father inside a racist militia, he has to decide what's more important, his father's approval or speaking up for what is right. So this book deals with themes of racism, finding your voice to speak up against hate, and also with mental health, because Rebel's father deals with PTSD. He's a veteran who has those issues. But the book that we'll be talking about more today is my debut novel, is The Prophet Calls. And this is the story of Gentry Forrester, and she's also 13, and she lives in a polygamous community among God's chosen people. But when the prophet's revelations put her family in danger, she has to decide whether to adhere to his terrible demands or discover what it truly means to be free. And this deals with a character who is in a little bit different society than what most people are used to, but she's finding her voice, deals with issues of faith, family, of course, because this is a large dynamic family. She has 21 siblings because she has 3 mothers. And so, and it's just one of those books that's really about girl power and finding who you are.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And finally, we have an author who has been said about her that this talented high schooler is ready to join the ranks of America's next wave of great fantasy and adventure writers, with a glowing, solid 5-star review rating on Amazon, describing her book as very clever and action-packed. So Gracie Dix, please tell us about your exciting book, The Vort Chronicles. Welcome to Superhero School.
Welcome to Superhero School is book 1 of the Vort Chronicles, and it follows the twins Oliver and Jessica as with their friends as they try to defeat the evil villains of Vort. Also, they also are in the superhero school. Hence the title. Sorry.
Great.
And it follows them as they try to defeat Borg, and they go on all these fun adventures, meet new people, actually befriend some people, and also meet old friends.
Excellent. Great. A lot of action. Thank you. So I love how all of your books are so different. I'm sure we have plenty to talk about. And so some of you touched on it a little bit in your intro, and if you'd like to expand a little bit, I'd love to know, what was your inspiration for your stories? Did you need to do a lot of research? Did you pull from your own childhood? And so if we may, can we start with Rajani?
Yes. So the inspiration for Midsummer's Mayhem came from a childhood memory of mine, because I was a weird child with an overactive imagination and alone. So my dad would sometimes go on business trips, and when he came back, I would wonder, how would I know if the person who came back wasn't my dad, but somebody who looked exactly like him? Like, how could you tell? And so I created a series of quiz questions that only my real dad would know the answer to. And, luckily it was always my real dad. But when it came time to write a book, I was like, well, what if there's a girl whose dad comes back from a business trip and he's acting really strange, and there's something actually wrong with him, but she's the only one who notices? So then I started asking myself questions. I was like, well, what's wrong with him? And then I was like, okay, it's definitely something magical, because that's interesting to me. And then I was like, well, why is she the only one who notices? And I said, maybe she's one of many siblings, and she's the one that's closest to her dad, maybe because she's the youngest and the older ones are all busy doing their thing, as teenagers tend to do. And maybe that's why she's the only one who notices. So I wanted to create this family with a lot of chaos and noise and people having their own interests. And then the youngest one, who hasn't just gotten to that point yet because she's young, is kind of the one that is observing everything and wondering, how do I fit in the middle of it? And I will tell you that I have 2 children, and I part of the inspiration for this book came from them as well. I have an older son and a younger daughter, and they're 3 years apart. And they're both incredibly talented at all kinds of things, and they're super smart. But the older one always did things first. And I always wondered about my daughter, wondering, I don't know, he's already got the math thing wrapped up. How am I supposed to be good at math when he's that good at math? Or he's a musician, and can I be a musician? Because I'm not a musician compared to him, but it's just because you're 3 years younger. So I wanted to put some of that into my book. And then finally, I will say that the part of the inspiration came from Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream. Mm-hmm. And in that book, or in that play, they aren't exactly siblings, but the 2 women, Hermia and Helena, are described as being like sisters. And they have a very interesting relationship because they're very, very close. and then they're both interested in the same guy, and that drives a wedge between them. And so I was like, okay, let's explore a little bit about loving somebody, like really loving them, but also being jealous of them and being upset with them sometimes.
Yeah, that's life. It's beautiful. Mariama, you touched a little bit on it, and thank you for being so candid and writing this book, because I don't know that there are many books with this subject and in this theme. So would you like to tell us a little bit about your inspiration?
Yeah, the inspiration for Black girls like me, it definitely comes out of sort of a void of there not being any stories about transracial adoptees, so young people who are growing up in families that they're adopted into that might be of a different race than them. And so in some ways, this is the book I needed to find on bookshelves when I was a young person. I was a big reader, and I specifically loved going to the library to find books about kids and young people like me. I loved contemporary fiction, young people sort of going through the messiness of life and going on adventures and finding their voice. And so I was always on the lookout for, you know, Black girls, Black characters on book covers. But I was also looking for a book that had a family that looked like mine. I grew up, like I said, the oldest of four. 3 of us are adopted. One of my siblings is my parents' biological child. And so we're a sort of rainbow family, right? And I didn't see that experience in any literature I was reading. So for Black girls like me really came out of that. And also inspired by a lot of other things in my life. It's fiction again, but I say that a lot of the emotional truths that the character is facing are some of the things I faced growing up. So it's a book that lots of people can relate to. It deals with being the new kid. It deals with friendship. It deals with sort of tough family dynamics, finding your voice, having a first crush. But then it also is dealing with race and what does it feel like when you're experiencing the world in one way, but your sister who is older and a different race than you might be experiencing things differently, and also your parents. And I would also say a big inspiration for this book is I, like my main character, also come from a really musical, artistic family. So there's a lot of music, and music is sort of like the glue and the language that everyone sort of speaks in common in this book, I would say. And then also I have a poetry background. And so this book actually began as a series of poems in its very, very early drafts. And so if you read it, it has all types of different forms in it. It looks like a poem sometimes, it looks like a song, it looks like a definition. There are dreams, there are blog posts. And so it's sort of a mashup as far as genre too. It's a hybrid of all different types of stories coming together.
That's excellent. It's fantastic. Katie, you touched on it as well, celebrating your Chinese heritage and mythology and traditions, culture. So why did you make it, or why did you want to write this book as a fantasy, including all of that and bringing those, you know, deities and gods and demons to life?
Yeah, I love this question so much because when I was thinking about this book before I ever set, you know, my finger to the page and created these characters or this world, this book really came out of a need that I felt to write a story that was fantasy, which was has always been like my greatest bookish love, and to sort of marry that with, you know, a Chinese main character and a Chinese culture. That was something that I never really saw growing up. Like I would get to read a lot of great fantasy books like Percy Jackson. Those are some of my favorites growing up. That was actually also the comp title for The Dragon Warrior. And aside from, you know, fantasy that I could see in American bookstores, I could get my fill of Chinese fantasy and mythology through, there's this cartoon that I loved to watch growing up called Journey to the West. And it's based off the classic Chinese tale Journey to the West, which is about this monk who is traveling all across Asia to obtain these Buddhist scriptures. And along the way, he's protected by the Monkey King, which is a very powerful Chinese god in folklore, and a few other disciples. And they have to fight all these demons and monsters along the way, and they get into all sorts of trouble, and it's great fun. And that was one of my favorite shows watching growing up. And so I never felt like I could ever find a show that reflected me, though, because I was born in the States. I grew up here. I've only been to China twice. And so I always felt a little bit like a fish out of water. And when I wrote The Dragon Warrior, I really didn't have to do that much research. Like, of course, I fact checked. I read multiple different books just to sort of make sure I was getting the mythology as correct as I could. But I'd already learned so much just from growing up with, this content. I also went to Chinese school, so I learned a little bit about Chinese mythology there. So I feel like this book, in a way, has been taking form for my whole life. The quest takes place across Chinatowns, and as I said a little bit before, I grew up, traveling to different Chinatowns. My parents loved taking us to a different Chinatown wherever we could find them when we were visiting a new state, and so that was really the pull for the setting of the story. And aside from all of that, the sibling relationship and I think the family dynamics in the story are really one of the core elements of The Dragon Warrior. I grew up with two younger sisters, and so Farron is the protective older sister, and that was something that I felt growing up. And she also has a very close relationship with her grandfather, which is something that I wish I had, because my grandparents grew up, in China, so they were across the ocean. But that was just, the inspiration for this book has sort of been coming along for my whole life, pretty much.
Yeah, that's excellent. I did appreciate the glossary that you included, that I can learn, and you expanded more on those gods and the mythology and folklore. It was awesome. Nicole, how about you? I understand you do work with students who have autism, and how did you bring that, to Nova's voice?
So I don't work with kids anymore, but I did. But Nova's story was sort of separated from that. When I started working on it, I knew I wanted to write about a girl on the autism spectrum. I wanted to write about a girl who was like me as a child, and I wanted to write for like young me and some of the kids who don't see themselves so much in stories, and in particular my godchildren. There are not that many books, especially middle grade books, for that are about nonverbal or non-speaking or non-conversational kids on the autism spectrum. And when you see autistic characters in books, they tend to be the same sort of character. And while those are great books, I wanted to show a girl who is very creative and very loving and very imaginative, to sort of to move away from the stereotype of autistic people as being very math-minded and logical and not emotional or empathetic or anything like that, because that's just not my experience. So that was really important to me. And I knew I wanted her to have a relationship with a sister, because growing up, all I wanted was a sister. And my poor, sweet, long-suffering little brother, his name is Tyler. I used to dress him up in dresses and put a wig on him and call him Heather. And he was my little sister Heather for years, until he made his own friends and realized he didn't have to do that anymore. So in the books, I get to have like the sister I always wanted. So that's sort of where Nova came from. A lot of the research I had to do was more about the education system and special education in the 80s, because it's very different from when I was a kid, which is also very different from how it is now. Everything changes very quickly. The autism spectrum was defined somewhat differently in the 80s. And even little things like, because there's so much of a space element, when I started writing it, we referenced how many moons Neptune had as of 1986, and in the author's note said now they have this number of moons. And from the time I wrote the author's note to when it went to final edits, they discovered like 2 more moons for Neptune. So there was a lot of research in that capacity.
Wow, excellent. Wow, thank you. And Melanie, a lot of research must have gone in through the Prophet Calls. You did not share that you're in a polygamous community. So let us know how you came up with that idea and how you were inspired and what made you write this book.
Yes, a lot of research did go into this book. No, my undergraduate degree was in religious studies, and I've always been fascinated by religion, world religions, but particularly religions in the United States. I think it's very interesting how we have First Amendment rights, we have freedom of religion, but it's also like, when does that cross a line? And so I've always been fascinated by that sort of a topic. But, you know, so that was my undergraduate degree, but I did do a lot of research before this book, specifically about the community that inspired this novel, which is the FLDS. They are an actual community here in the United States. And so, you know, I just wanted to make sure I got the details right. So anytime there's a mention of a teaching or what they're wearing, or even how they do their hair, that's inspired by the FLDS community. Also the music aspect, Gentry plays the violin and I play the violin. And so any description of her violin or how the music makes her feel at that age, that's how I felt when I played the violin when I was 13 years old. It was really an escape for me. Mm-hmm. And this is the only place that she can really be herself, is when she's playing her music. And so I really wanted to incorporate that. And then obviously there's an overlying theme of kind of toxic masculinity, girl power that's going on here. And my previous life, I was a lawyer, and I was often the only woman in the room. And so, you know, I'm very used to that dynamic. And how do you make sure your voice is heard? How do you buck against the system? How do you make people see the way you see? And so I think all of those things really played into Gentry's story.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you. And Gracie, you have quite a story of how you became an author and how this book came to life. Do you want to tell us about that?
Well, okay. So I wanted to get my work out there. So I went online looking for a place that I could just publish maybe a poem or a short story. And I found this really cool website that I forgot the name of, slipping my mind. And I put one of my short stories in, and I tried to submit it, but it said that the minimum word count was 50,000 words. And I was really determined. So I started writing Welcome to Superhero School, and I started writing about the first thing that came to my mind, because I love fantasy. And I love superheroes. And I think the idea of magic and superpowers is really, really fascinating and really cool. Because I just think fantasy is it's like the great escape from your world. You can go from your world into another world, and it can be a wonderful escape. It really can.
That's awesome. Yes, for sure. I definitely agree. So we all have it, or you all have. I didn't write a book. I just love to read them. You all have such amazing characters, as you touched on, and the sibling relationships, the dynamics are all different, and they're changing. And I do like the word, Mariama, you use a lot. It's kind of messy, because, you know, this growing up in middle school, it is kind of messy. And so, is there a perfect sibling relationship? Is there sibling rivalry? Is there, you know, expectations and trying to live up to? So, Mariam, if we could start with you, the dynamics, you know, how would you describe sort of like the evolution? I think maybe too, because things change, and it's not always so perfect. So tell us a little bit more about Kata and Eve's, their relationship, and maybe their differences and their uniqueness and their similarities.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love this question, and I love the topic of this panel, because I feel like I don't get to talk about the sibling relationship as much, but it's really important, and it does evolve over the story. And I think when we first meet Eve, who's the older sister, she's 14, and Kata, who's the protagonist, is 11, the book starts with a road trip. And so I don't know if anyone has ever been in the car with their family or their siblings for extended periods of time, but it's always a little bit messy and tricky. And, you know, there are fun parts about it, but there are also parts that sometimes feel really lonely and really tense. And so right off the bat, and for Black girls like me, you know, Eve, her mom, and Kata are driving across country to meet her dad, who's already flown ahead to start his job. And you know, Kata wants to play road trip games. She wants to play like the license plate game where you try to find a license plate from every state outside the window. But Eve, who is starting high schoolers in the middle of her 9th grade year, is like, I want to sit in the back seat, which I've claimed, and I want to like read magazines and not actually interact with you. And so there's that rift between when, you know, a younger sibling and an older sibling maybe were close, but one of the siblings is sort of trying to step out, and the little sibling isn't as cool anymore, or isn't as interesting to hang out with. And so that dynamic like starts off right off the bat, and sort of continues throughout, where Eve is sort of like, you're such a baby. I can't believe you don't understand what's going on here sometimes. But I think the most important part for me to get about their sibling dynamic in this book is also that they have this age difference, which a lot of people maybe can relate to, but also one sister is white and one sister is Black. And so even though they're both experiencing the same sort of life events, they're both, you know, leaving school in the middle of a really important school year. They're both moving to a new state. They're both trying to make new friends. Some of the things that Makeda is experiencing are very different than her sister. So on the first day of school, Makeda gets a lot of questions about, well, you don't look like your family. Like, what's going on here? And Eve, on the other hand, like has like 10 phone numbers of friends when she leaves the first day of school and is not getting asked the same question. And so as the book progresses, you know, things we've seen as far as sibling relationships are definitely there. But also the two sisters come to sort of some tension and some sort of moments of conflict around race and maybe not understanding each other's experience, and also maybe being a little jealous, right, of the way that each of them are experiencing the world. That Kata feels like it's so easy for Eve to sort of fit in. And then Eve sometimes feels like, well, but you're really special. Like everyone thinks you're special all the time. And so they have to sort of figure out how to love each other, how to communicate with each other with, you know, sort of sister stuff going on that we already know, and then also how to communicate across racial lines as well.
Sure. I have to just say, I loved when I read your book that you wrote sort of the metaphor that Makeda felt like there was a canyon between that. I was just so heart-wrenching, but beautiful. And I can, you know, and there's an echo and that she's not hearing the whole message. I just love that. And that was just so easy, I think, for readers to understand where they are coming from. That was so beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah.
You're welcome. So Katie, you have Farron, who is the warrior, and the father's daughter, you know, and then Alex is the scholar who's into video games and sort of, you know, memorization and explaining things. Was there any tension between them? You know, did Alex want to be the warrior? Did he feel inadequate or have to live up to Farron?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for bringing up the very complicated dynamic between these siblings, because that was one of my favorite parts in writing the story. You know, as I said before, I grew up with two younger sisters, and it wasn't always easy, although, you know, we've had our close periods and then we've had like more distant periods. So that was something that I really wanted to infuse in the relationship between Farron and Alex. As you said, Farron is sort of the stronger sibling, which, you know, given that she's like the girl, it's a little bit flipping like gender stereotypes on their heads, right? Because then Alex is the one who's like not so great at fighting, but he's like very smart. And so these two siblings who have grown up ostracized in this community and feel like they don't really have anyone besides themselves, you know, they grow up very close, but at the same time, they are aware of their differences, and that's something that becomes even more clear as they undertake this quest to save the world. They have like their own roles, and in a way they balance each other out very well, because Farron can take the lead attacking the demons and whatnot, and then Alex can be the one solving the riddle and saying, oh, we have to go here next. This is how we're going to save the world. But then I can't say too much because it would be a spoiler, but the dynamic between the siblings becomes very complicated, and I kind of felt that pretty deeply with my siblings as I've grown up, you know, going to high school and then going away for college. Our relationship has changed, and that's something that I don't necessarily see as bad. I just think it's something very natural for siblings to go through. And even though I sort of like paved the way, I guess, not really paved the way, but I was the first one to do a lot of things. And I realized that even though I took one path in life, like that's not necessarily the path that either of my sisters want to take, and that's totally fine. They are their own people and they are going to find their own way. And I think that was the message that I really wanted to send with the sibling relationship between Farron and Alex, was that they're two siblings who grew up together and they were pretty much all that each other had, and they love each other very deeply, but they also have their differences and they are on their different paths in life, but they can only just wish each other all the best.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's always a but, like, there can be one thing, but there's a little something. And Nicole, for Nova and Bridget, there is a 5-year age difference. And I like how you say that Bridget is, Nova's first teacher, and she seems to be her protector. And one thing that you kind of refer to a few times in the book, and because unfortunately it needs to be said to many people, that my sister's not dumb, she's a thinker, not a talker. Can you tell us about how Bridget, and Nova, their relationship work?
Okay. So I think it's common for us older siblings to feel like the teacher for the younger one, especially if you're the oldest. So with my brother, we were always playing school and I considered myself his first teacher. So I put a little bit of that into Bridget and Nova, but because their age gap is bigger, it was even more so for Bridget. And when they were living at home, their father had gone originally MIA and later declared dead in Vietnam. And their mother has some mental health issues that were exacerbated by her husband's loss. So Bridget was sort of like an extra mother to Nova, which also I think happens a lot with oldest siblings. And so she was doing a lot of academic stuff with her. She was doing a lot of social stuff with her. She was doing a lot of the regular big sister teaching with her because she wanted Nova to succeed. And then Nova would go to school, or once they were in foster care, and not everybody spent as much time working to understand Nova. So there was that element between the two of them that Bridget is always caring for Nova. And then it starts to, throughout the book, with some of the memories you see that there's Bridget is having like an internal conflict because she wants to also be a high school senior. She wants to have fun. She has a boyfriend. She has friends. And one of my favorite scenes that I wrote is she brings Nova with her to a high school Halloween party, which maybe isn't the most appropriate place for a little kid, but she brings her with her. And then later Nova, who has misbehaved during this party because she hates it, she doesn't want to be there, she wants to go trick-or-treating, she's pouting in one room and she overhears her sister's boyfriend say, basically, you're going to go away to college and leave her though, right? And Bridget is like, no, I'm going to find a way to take her with me. And then Nova feels very guilty because she spends such pain all night long to torture her sister. And her sister is still so focused on, I'm going to put my life on hold for you, which is what makes it especially difficult when they're separated. So throughout the book, which takes place over 10 days, Nova is counting down the days till she believes her sister will come back because her sister promised and she doesn't break promises.
And I like how you approached the communication, with Bridget's absence in the letters that Nova writes. And they're just such a nice way to really dive into Nova's head and how she's feeling and all of her thoughts. I love that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So Melanie, we have a lot of siblings, as you mentioned, 21. So we don't have to touch base on all of them, but really, of course, what stood out to me in the Prophet Calls was the relationship between Gentry and her sister Amy, who has Down syndrome. And so maybe a little bit like Nicole's book, A Protector and, best friend. You refer to her partner in crime. So if you can kind of tell us about their relationship, and maybe a little bit about Tanner and maybe Meryl as well.
Sure. No, and I'm really excited to be talking about sibling relationships because this is the first time for this book, much like Mariama, that I've been asked to talk about sibling relationships. And it's so important to this book, or it was for me. And I mean, that's why the cover of the book actually has Gentry flanked by her sisters, is because that dynamic is very important to the main character. But yes, as you mentioned, Amy does have Down syndrome, and that character was inspired by my great uncle who had Down syndrome, and I played with him a lot when I was a child. I loved him dearly. He is no longer with us, but I really wanted to put his spirit in this character. And much like him, Amy doesn't let the Down syndrome define who she is, you know, and Gentry does not see it as a weakness like much of the community does. She sees it as a strength in her sister. And so, but yes, she is very much a caretaker, which would be normal in this community. Girls of 13 would be taking care of a lot of kids. And so I wanted to sort of put that role on her, but also she takes it on lovingly and she wants to take it on. And then you mentioned her brother, Tanner. That's her older brother. And they share the love of music. I mean, they both play the violin. They have that shared passion. And he's one of the few males in the community who sees Gentry's inner strength and encourages her to be herself, which would be very unusual in this community. And in memoirs that I've read, have heard of, there are, you know, men in these communities, boys, who do this. And so I really wanted to show not all of the men are are bad guys, so to speak, or, you know, because that's not how it really is. I mean, you know, there's different shades of that. And so anyway, they're all living under this sort of oppression. And so I wanted to show how he was lifting her up. And then with Meryl, I had a lot of fun with this relationship because Meryl is her older sister. And at the very beginning of the book, you see she's very much the rule follower, does everything she's supposed to do, is submissive, knows all the prayers, you know, basically the opposite of who Gentry is, because Gentry doesn't like any of that. And I wanted to show how their relationship changed and how, as Gentry develops through the book and is sort of coming of age, she sees Meryl in a different light and learns to respect her and see the pressures that her sister is facing and why she's dealing with the things that she's dealing with. And she sort of learns that Meryl is doing those things in a lot of ways to protect her, which she doesn't see at first. And so those were a lot of the reason. It was so fun to have, you know, 21 siblings. I have one sibling. And so this was a very different dynamic for me to have all these siblings. But, you know, like a family, sometimes you're closer to some than others. And so I wanted to show that. That's why I really honed in on, there's 21, but I really talk about maybe 5 or 6 really particularly, because other than that, it would just get out of hand. So, but it was a lot of fun.
Yes, thank you. And Gracie, you have Oliver and Jess, and they're twins, I understand.
Yes.
Yeah, and I love how they do work together. They kind of lift each other up, and they're there for each other in their mission, and that they know how to ask and kind of accept help. Do you want to expand a little bit about their relationship?
Well, okay, I based their relationship off of my brother and I's relationship. He's older. But when we were younger, we did fight, but not a lot. And then he went away to college and he came back and we're so much closer because I missed him so much. And now I'm basing Oliver and Jessica's relationship off of the relationship I have now with my brother, because I realized that it was really silly for me to be mad at him when I was younger, because life is too short to be mad at your sibling for all those really small things that happen. And the way that Oliver and Jessica work together is really key. I think it's really key because they act like friends as well as siblings. And sometimes you need a friend, not a sibling. And sometimes you need a sibling, not a friend. So that's what I tried to base their relationship on.
Excellent, thank you. And then Rajani, you know, with not having any siblings growing up to writing about 4, and as you mentioned, they all have their different, you know, specific, you know, talents that they work on. And Mimi kind of refers, you know, that her siblings are in the spotlight and that she maybe sometimes considers herself an afterthought. Yeah, and I think that it was really touching, but then so amazing, as the book progressed. And again, she says that she doesn't have much musical talent, but I kind of noticed, she had a clarinet. So tell us about just a little bit more about maybe how she dealt with her sisters as she thought they were so self-involved.
Yeah, this is a great question. So I'm also excited because I never get to talk about sibling relationships either. It's always about magic and baking, which is great. So, it's interesting because a lot of our books involve music, and music is a big theme in Midsummer's Mayhem as well. And there's a scene at the beginning, near the beginning, where Mimi and her siblings are all in the same room together, and the three older ones, who are 17, 16, and 15, so significantly older than her, start jamming out on a song, and she's just like, I'm just going to mess this up. I don't have the ability to participate in this kind of conversation, in this musical conversation. So she literally just creeps out of the room and no one pays attention to her, and she heads out into the woods. And to me, that was one of the kind of first scenes that came to me about this book. It was a metaphor for how she was feeling in general in her family, that she was the one that if she left, no one would care. My daughter jokes. So my daughter's name is Mira. We call her Mimi. She's partly the inspiration for this main character. She jokes with me that the three sisters in this story are kind of all three aspects of her personality. And my son and she's like, the older brother is definitely like my son. That is just kind of slightly different interpretation of my son. So in a way, these four siblings are my two children. But I really, the two older sisters are only a year apart, and they really do compete with each other. They're interested in different things, but a lot of times one of them always gets more attention from boys. And at this point in their lives, that's kind of the thing that matters the most to them. So there's a lot of tension there. And the 15-year-old Jules is always feeling like whenever any boy meets her older sister, she's the one that he's interested in. So I wanted to play that up because they're very, very close and they do love each other, but they really can't stand each other right now. And they're also in that teenage mode of, I just have to talk about myself and think about myself at all times. But to bring it back to the musical issue, there's a scene near the end of the book where the four siblings get together and they play music, and Mimi has something to contribute. And so I wanted to, and that was also an example of the way that she's changed and grown as the story has gone on.
Yeah, that was a beautiful scene too. That really spoke to me as a musician myself. I feel like we all should have brought some instruments and had a little jam session today. Wow, it's so amazing to hear all of you guys, ladies, just talking about such different relationships where, again, they're messy, they're worked out, they're protective, they're teachers. I love it. And I was wondering, will you guys be writing more with more siblings? Do you kind of love that aspect of your writing? So with our last question, if we can kind of just see what you guys might be working on, ladies, will be working on next, and if they will deal with any more siblings. Melanie, would you like to share?
Well, yes, I am working right now, but unfortunately, I can't really share what I'm working on. I'm in that gray phase right now where I can't really talk about it. But I do love sibling dynamics, and I think they're very important. And so I would love to play with that again. Excellent.
And Gracie, you mentioned that you have a prequel, and are you working on your sequel?
I am working on the sequel, and it does expand a little bit more on sibling relationships because, small spoiler alert, I introduced two new characters, and they are twins. They're lookalike twins. I don't know if that matters, but they have a bit of a different relationship than the rest of the twins because they tease each other a lot. And it may not seem like they love each other, but they really, really, really do. Do you want me to give like a one sentence, like brief of what my second book's going to be?
Sure. Absolutely.
Okay. So without saying too much, the 12, I think there's 12. I've lost count. I have so many main characters. The main characters get invited to participate on a game show / reality TV show. And let's just say there's a little bit of a sinister twist behind it that they don't know about.
Excellent. Sounds great. Nicole, are you working on anything currently?
I am. So I can't say too much about my second book, except that the main character is an only child and it's about cousin relationships instead of sibling relationships. And then I'm also working on my master's thesis manuscript. And that one is about a girl and she has a younger stepbrother, and their relationship is important to that story. And that's fun for me. Because like I said, I have one brother, but I also have 3 stepbrothers, and it's a different type of relationship that I get to explore now.
Wonderful. Thank you. And Katie, you mentioned that we'll be getting a sequel.
Yes. So the sequel is called The Fallen Hero, and it comes out this October. And there will be more complicated sibling dynamics with the same siblings, Farron and Alex, on their next adventures. So keep an eye out for that. And in addition to that, I'm working on some more middle grade. Can't say too much, but there's definitely more complicated sibling dynamics, lots of sibling banter, and I hope to share more soon.
Excellent, excellent. And Mariama?
Yes, I'm really excited. I have a middle grade that will be coming out in 2022 called In the Key of Us. It's about 2 Black girls who find themselves at music camp, become friends, and an eventual romance. And each of them is dealing with their own specific family dynamic. So we actually have like more of a cousin-sister relationship in one family and an only child, which will be interesting to explore. And then I also have a young adult that I just announced called Forever Is Now, about a young woman growing up in Oakland who's dealing with living with anxiety. And I'm really excited to explore a brother-sister relationship in that book. They have a lot of differences, but they're also sort of like protectors for one another, even though he's younger than her. So that does not have a date out yet, but it will be out soon-ish.
Okay, excellent. And Rajani, you've got a horizon.
Yes, so in February 2021, I have a book called Red, White, and Whole, which is a novel in verse. And it involves an only child. It's set in 1983, and it's about a girl who is the daughter of Indian immigrants who feels caught between the worlds of her parents and immigrant community and the world of her school and 1980s pop culture. And then her mother gets sick and she feels torn in a completely different way. So she has no siblings, but there's a lot of really good best friend relationships and cousin relationships and kind of like friend relationships in that book. And then in June 2021 is the companion novel to Midsummer's Mayhem called Much Ado About Baseball, which is kind of Team Salty from Midsummer's Mayhem. So it's a girl and a boy who are both math competition rivals who end up on the same summer baseball team, and they can't stand each other, but they've got to find a way to get along to help the team win. And each of them has an older sibling, and there's another friend who has twin younger sisters. So there's lots of sibling dynamics in that book.
Wow, it sounds like we have just so much to look forward to, and I can't wait. And it's kind of the silver lining and something to look forward to after what we've been experiencing right now. So thank you so much for all of that and your contributions to fantastic middle grade literature. This is our time is up. And so I just want to say once again that it's just been such a privilege speaking with you all today. Thank you so much for being here and engaging in this fantastic discussion. I'm sure we can talk more and more, but I enthusiastically recommend all your books. And as I said, I cannot wait to read what's next. And if it's okay, I'd like to just say on behalf of the authors, we'd like to thank you, the viewers, for watching and hope that you've enjoyed this panel as much as we have. Please stay in touch on social media and check out our authors' websites for lots of great content and some newsletters. And lastly, we thank the organizers of Middle Ground Book Fest, Shannon Doleski, Tanya Guerrero, Lorian Lawrence, and Janae Marks for their incredible team effort in planning, executing, and promoting this festival, as well as writing some amazing middle grade books of their own. We are so looking forward to viewing the other panels. So thank you guys, ladies, all once again. And we hope that you enjoy. Have a good one. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.